Imagine your phone rings this afternoon. It's your biggest customer, and they tell you, we're doubling your volume starting next week. Now, is your first reaction to celebrate, or would you panic a little? What if I told you that winning more business isn't the hard part? Building a business that's ready for it is, because there's a certain type of business growth that doesn't just test your capacity, it really reveals the strength of your business. Well, I'm not going to tell you that, but today's guest might. Hello, everyone, and welcome to CLDA's Final Mile Fridays. I'm Lorena Camargo, president of the CLDA, the Customized Logistics and Delivery Association. And whether you're a longtime CLDA member or you're discovering our community for the very first time, thank you so much for joining us. Every week, we're bringing together leaders from across the final mile industry to share practical ideas and real world experience to help you build a stronger business. And today, I am so excited to kick off this series with a great friend of mine, Tom Jowers. Let me tell you a little bit about him and why you should listen to him. He started in logistics in 1992 at a small startup in Houston called Vianet Delivery, who was bought by US Delivery and then bought by Corporate Express. He helped start an automotive logistics company in Houston soon thereafter. In 2003, he became the operating partner for ADL, and in 2022, he sold to private equity and has since stayed on as regional president for the Southeast region. He continues to help ADL with M&A activity, and I had the privilege of serving with him on the CLDA board of directors. So let's go ahead and bring him on. Hi, Tom. Thank you so
Hi.
much for joining us.
Hey, Lorena. Thank you so much for having me, and it's good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, we have a great topic. So, let's get started. Whenever people think of a strong business, they have various definitions. So, what do you mean by having a strong business that's ready for growth?
So, the best businesses, in my opinion, always have just one thing in common. They're predictable, right? Customers know what they're going to get every day, employees know what's expected. Financially, they understand their business. And strong companies aren't constantly reacting to their problems. They built systems that prevent most of them. So, predictability, is key as far as I'm concerned.
Now, this is something that I feel like everyone struggles with. I know that I still struggle with it, where I'm just looking at the top line revenue.
Right.
Uh Obviously, I've been in business for almost 15 years, so I have learned to look at the bottom line. But is revenue really the best measure of success for a business?
It all depends on who you talk to, but in my opinion, it's not even close. Revenue is important, of course, but it's only part of the story. I would rather own a $10 million company that's making 15% in profit than a $50 million company that's breaking even. Profit funds growth, cash flow keeps the lights on. Revenue can actually hide a lot of problems that you're not aware that you have. So if you're putting a lot of money to the top line, but you're not bringing anything to the bottom line, are you really successful?
Right. And something that I love about your experience is that not you didn't just like grow a final mile company, you're also helping a private equity company go out there like and make acquisitions. So we're not gonna mention any names or anything. It's just based on your experience. Could you tell us a little bit about the habits that successful business owners consistently demonstrate?
So, it comes down to a lot of things. Profitability, cash flow, leadership, culture. All of those things are very important, but they all four matter equally as far as I'm concerned. Now, these are my opinions, not necessarily the opinions of my private equity partners. But profitability tells you if your business model works, right? If everything that you're doing is making money like it needs to. Cash flow tells you if you can survive, right? That's a common thing. Leadership determines whether the company can grow beyond the owner, right? Which is very, very important, right? You need to know that that's the case. And culture is what everybody does when nobody's watching, right? If one of those four is weak, eventually the entire business feels it, right? So when private equity is looking, those are really four of the main things that they're looking at to make sure, right, that they can help you get to the next level or become part of a bigger organization.
Mhm. Okay, I love that you mentioned, the business owner and the leadership because about 90%, this is I just made up this stat, but from what I've seen, about 90% of final mile companies do fall in that 10 million annual revenue and under. And even up until 10 million, that's amazing because only 3% of businesses in America even get to $1 million. So if you're at 10 million, congratulations, that's amazing. But even at that level, the operations still heavily rely on the owner. They may have an established team, but still customers still feel that access to the owner, especially if, they've been with them since day one. So, can you share any lessons while growing ADL about like delegation, leadership, building systems for you to get to that level?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that I learned is I had to stop trying to solve everything myself, right? I mean, and that came really with the addition of the private equity team, right? Being nose to the grindstone on the everyday stuff, micromanaging more than I should have, trying to solve every problem. As we continue to grow, even just as ADL before the private equity acquisition, it just wasn't possible for me to handle all of those things, right? And if my team is waiting on me to give them the decisions, and I have not empowered them to make some of those decisions themselves, then you become the bottleneck, right? And unfortunately, that happens with a lot of owners, right? We want to have the last say on everything. We want to be able to do this, but if you can't go on vacation for 2 weeks and not be worried that your business is going to collapse, then you've done something wrong. That means that you have not built a team that is empowered to make the decisions to keep the business moving forward. So that's a big part of it, right? And I was guilty of it as well. I'm probably still a little bit guilty of it to this day, but I'm doing my very best to kind of pull out of that with the team that I manage. So
Next. Okay. So I love that you're still admitting you're a control freak. I kind of knew that because I worked with you for so long. Just kidding.
yeah,
Um, but there's a lot of owners out there that are proud, like, hey, my phone's always on 24/7. You could reach out to me. What advice would you give, that owner
you
that's
know,
still very proud to be very involved?
well, I mean, and it's not just pride, it's stubbornness, right? If you go, depending on how long your business has been around, if you've been doing the exact same thing for 20 years, it's very difficult to get that mindset to change. Delegation, building systems, those kind of things are very, very important. And to be clear, delegation isn't just dumping work on somebody else, right? It's giving people the authority, the tools, and the accountability so that they can succeed as well. Systems create consistency, leadership builds confidence, and you have to have both, right? It is hard as an owner to get yourself out of that. I've got to be involved in every little aspect. And if you have done a really good job mentoring your team and getting them to the point where they can handle some of that, then the weight gets lifted off your shoulders a little bit, right? And it makes things a little bit easier for you. You're not stressed all the time like you should be or like you shouldn't be. And then you can focus on things that are a little more important, like, for example, business development, right? You want to start growing that top line and making that bottom line a little bit fatter. Don't let your team who is focused on the operation focus on the operation and get those things handled that you need to have handled. And you focus on growing your business and the strategic part of the business as opposed to the day-to-day grind and operation.
Okay. So a couple of things that you mentioned, delegating the authority. I know that early on I struggled with that because it's like, okay, someone would make a decision and like, ooh, you know what? Like that's not what I would have done. Let me go ahead and override it. But I kind of learned that that defeats its purpose because then employees don't feel empowered that they could go out there and make those decisions. Then it's just like, all right, like let me just see like what Lorena wants. And it like it works against you because then like you're back to then just being on call and everybody reaching out to you for that, right? Did you ever have any situation where it's like an employee made a decision? It wasn't the worst decision, but it's like, oh, I would have handled it something differently, like another way. Did that ever happen to you?
Yeah, of course. I mean, any leader that said that they've not made a bad decision or not made the wrong decision would be, basically telling a lie. That's how we learn. That's how we get to the next level as leaders, is that we make those mistakes and we're able to impart that wisdom onto the people that have worked with us. You've got to have the confidence in your people, right? Sometimes the worst decision is not making a decision at all. And if you get your team to a point where they don't feel comfortable making that decision, a decision could go unmade, and then it affects a customer, it affects a delivery, it affects another employee or something like that. So sometimes the worst decision is the inability to be able to make one. And if you're that bottleneck, you've got to put yourself in a situation where you aren't any longer, right? And that you trust the people. You hired them for a reason, right? And if you hired them for a reason, give them the ability to do the things that you hired them to do.
That's great. So what advice would you give an owner? Like what's, the timeline? Obviously, you're not going to hire, the employee like an operations manager and day one, just like, all right, I'm going on vacation. So how would you like, what advice would you give for like that handoff? Obviously, it's not overnight.
No, I mean, you've got to, it's developing your team, right? You've got to develop a team. You've got to develop a team that, maybe I say this the wrong way, but if you know that you have a team that's going to make the exact same decision that you would have made, you've got the right team, right? That doesn't happen overnight. You have to develop trust with your team. You have to develop, they've got to respect your position and how you handle things. You've got to speak their language. I mean, I know you've heard of the love languages. That's not anything that's uncommon, right? You've got to learn to speak the language of the people that work with you and what's going to get the most out of them, what motivates them, right? Is it a thank you every day? Is it you buy lunch once a week because is it they like acts of service? What are the different things that are going to get the best out of your people where I don't want people to be afraid of me, but I don't mind people being afraid to disappoint me, right? There's a big difference between the two. You know, Too many times people see these, CEO, CFO, COO roles, presidential roles, and they're like, oh my God, that's the president, that's the CFO, that's the CEO. And immediately everybody gets all, tense and scared, right? That's not what you want. You want them to be afraid to disappoint you, in my opinion. And if you've built the right team and if you've given them the tools necessary to be able to get there, they will get to the next level and lead by example. Absolutely lead by example. We've heard that 1,000 times in our industry. Treat other people the way you want to be treated and lead by example. And that puts you in a position where they're going, is this the right decision for me to make? And they're already going to know, right? Because they've been mentored and taught the things that they need to do to get to the next level.
Okay, cool. Now let's go back to revenue because I have always, me, I always have a bunch of questions.
Sure.
All right, so let's talk about revenue. Again, people look at top line. That's exciting, great for the ego. Um, but how would you define like profitable revenue? Obviously, we know bottom line, but like how would you make sure that you're acquiring the right type of business so that you're not just growing your top line or getting busier, you're actually building a business.
At one of the CLDA conferences in the very beginning when I joined many years ago, Rick McClelland said, "Not every customer is your customer," right? You can't be everything to everyone all the time, and you shouldn't try to be everything to everyone all the time. I know you've got a family to support. I know you've got employees that you want to make sure get taken care of, but not every piece of business is a business for you to be good at, right? You're not going to be good at absolutely everything. It's not going to happen. And when you spread yourself too thin, you put yourself in a position where you can't service the customers the way you need to. I say that only to go back to when you're talking to a customer, there's so many different ways to answer the question that you're asking, right? What is a profitable customer? Well, it depends on a lot of different factors. What kind of business is it? Is it on-demand business? Is it truckload? Is it less than truckload? Is it a regional network where you're combining multiple customers on a single route? Is it dedicated fleet, right? When it comes down, that answer can just be answered. That question can just be answered so many different ways, and without literally digging into each individual customer and saying this is profitable or this isn't profitable, right? It's kind of difficult to give that answer without having the full picture. What I would say is it's not a drive to the bottom line, right? If you're out there and you're doing an RFP and you think the only way to get to that RFP is to offer the lowest common rate that you can in order to be able to get to the next level of that RFP, that's probably a problem. That's probably a red flag, right? Because if you're trying to be, we want to be the best choice option, not the low cost provider, right? And that's a big deal for a lot of guys in our industry, right? They want to continue to build. But if you're starting to build an infrastructure with a customer base that ends up being 60% of your revenue, and then all of a sudden that business goes away. I mean, we all saw what happened with, well, I mean, no disrespect to Pitney Bowes, but we all know what happened with Pitney Bowes, and a lot of people were heavily weighted into that work, and that work goes away. When it does, now what do you do, right? Because you've leveraged so much on that individual customer. And in a lot of those situations, that's a recipe for failure, right? Because you're in a situation where you've leveraged yourself so much that it could harm you as you move forward. So I don't know that I've actually answered your question other than to say each situation is going to be a little bit different. Heck, the name of our association is the Customized, right, Logistics and Delivery Association, which means that Everything that we do for our customers, for the most part, is customized to their needs. So it's really going to come down to their needs and what your capabilities are to determine what a profitable versus a not profitable customer is.
Mhm. So yes, you actually mentioned something that we also always struggle with, where you have like a big customer and it's like you kind of grow your business and your systems around them, but there's no guarantee that they're going to be in business for a while. So how would you balance that where like obviously like this customer wants to keep you giving you more business, amazing, right? But how do you balance it out where like they don't become like 99%, I mean I'm exaggerating a little, but where they don't become 99% of your business?
I mean, it comes down to awareness, really. I mean, you've got to be aware of what you're committing to, right? If one customer makes up 99% of your business, that's volatile, right? And if they go bankrupt tomorrow, if they decide that it's time to go change, if they decide to put out an RFP for the business that you're doing to see whether or not your pricing is in line, they're in the driver's seat. I mean, and look, typically the customer is in the driver's seat, right? When it comes to who they're going to do business with, who their final mile provider is going to be, that's always something that we have to look at. I mean, but realistically speaking, I mean, if you're in a position where a customer is more than 20 or 25% of your business, then you're in a kind of a volatile situation, right? Because then they're going to control a little bit too much of it. And if you look at the margins that we are getting nowadays to do this type of work, and we won't talk about what those are, but if you look at the margins that we're getting, 25% of your business walks out the door and you cannot scale, then there's only one option, right? You're either shutting the doors, or you better darn well find another customer, that can replace that 25% or 30% or 40% of your business. Otherwise, we've all seen people come and go that have come in and leveraged themselves too much on a single customer, and that customer has an issue, or this customer has an issue, and you're in a position where you're left holding the bag, and you've got employees to look after and take care of. And I'll be honest with you, I think about that all the time. We don't have any customers that are that large of our business, but when I look at what we do every day, I think about the 3,000 contractors, the 1,000 employees. I'm thinking about the 4,000 or 5,000 people that work for us, and how what we do affects them, right? It's not just about us. We did not build these companies. The people that work with us and work for us, those are the ones that build the company. We're just guys, trying to steer the ship. So, I would say, without, drolling on about it, is that don't let one customer become too much of your revenue. Because then if you ever get into a position where you're say, hey, I'm at a position where I think I've leveled up, I've gotten as big as I think I can get, I need somebody to help me get to the next level, right? And if that becomes a private equity investor, if that becomes private equity making you part of a larger organization or whatever, one of the first things they're going to look at is how much of my business is leveraged with one customer, and how volatile is the business that we're doing, right? If that business can walk away tomorrow, things are going to look a little bit different when you go to making a sell, or to go become part of a bigger organization.
Okay. Let's dig into that a little deeper about diversifying your business. So mostly everyone that I talk to at CLDA, they're all in on medical courier, and it's like such a big field. One of the reasons like why you stuck out to me, well, for so many reasons, but you went in deep in automotive logistics.
Correct.
So and even within that, you diversified, because automotive isn't just like one component, it's a bunch of stuff. Could you talk to us a little bit about that, about automotive logistics?
I mean, not really much to share. Look, there's a couple of things that we feel like are almost recession proof, right? People are always going to need medicine. People are always going to need medical devices. People are always going to be driving cars, right? So if you look at those types of business, we were looking for business that we would be able to sustain for the long term, right? Business that we could almost be protected from recession. Obviously fuel affects us regardless of the situation, right? But medical is always going to be around. Automotive is always going to be around. And we were looking for something that would at least provide some level of stability, without the fluxes, not having to worry about, the postal service making a change, or not have to worry about, different things in the industry and the market changing. To your point, we are diversified significantly more than that. But those were the ones where we built our core and we found a niche. Like I said earlier, we weren't trying to be everything to everyone. We were trying to be an expert in one or two things, not 15 different things. And although we've diversified into some of those other verticals, our core, at least our core in the southeast portion of our company, is the automotive. But in the Midwest and the Southwest, throughout our regions, we are heavily leveraged on the pharmaceutical and medical side of the industry. The auto now for ADL Final Mile as a whole is a smaller portion of the business in comparison to our medical and pharma work that we do throughout the rest of the country.
Okay, cool. So what advice would you give? You already mentioned about diversifying your customer base, but more about diversifying the industries that you serve. What advice would you have for us that either like just do medical or just do automotive or just do like one type of industry?
I mean, it really comes down to what you and your partners, or you and your team decide are areas that you think are beneficial. I mean, obviously, if a customer comes to us, we'll look at pretty much anything, but it has to make sense, right? It has to be something that fits within our network. It has to be something that makes sense to us to put together and to make that happen. So I would say, look at everything. Don't say yes to everything, but look at everything, right? Again, customized logistics, right? If we have a customer that doesn't fit within our network, that doesn't mean that we can't do business with them. That may mean that we may need to look at things a little bit differently and see if that's something that we can put together and something we can do.
Okay, thanks. So we are at time. And I could talk to you forever, but this is just a 20-minute conversation.
Yep.
Um, what advice would you give someone that's like at the $10 million level, but is trying to get to the next level, 25 million? What advice would you give them?
Don't be afraid to take chances. Don't be afraid to take risks. Look, being an entrepreneur is risky, just regardless of the situation, right? It's not easy to put yourself out there, but once you do, it's great. Take care of your customers, invest in your people, know your numbers, build systems instead of depending on heroes. Stay humble enough to keep learning, right? Because we never stop learning. We've made our share of mistakes, but every one of those lessons made us a better company, right? Growth isn't just about getting larger, it's about getting better. And if you focus on getting better every day, the growth usually takes care of itself.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Tom. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. We will tag you on LinkedIn so that people could follow you and see all the amazing things that you and ADL are up to.
I appreciate that. And for everybody out there, this has been CLDA Final Mile Fridays. Happy Friday.
Thank you, Tom. Well, if you found this conversation valuable, we would love if you could like, share, and really just like comment like what your opinion was on any of the things that we talked about. We will be posting a blog summary on this topic. But yeah, we'll be back next Friday with another practical conversation. In line with today's topic, when it comes to scaling a business, a lot of us rely on independent contractors. So we'll be talking with Wendy Greenland with Open Force on how to do things the right way. So thank you so much, all who could join us, who are watching the replay. And until then, until next Friday, keep moving the final mile forward.